AI in the file prompts.md. As you'll learn, prompts are essentially the instructions we feed into the AI, and it's our way of communicating what we want the AI to do. In this case, I want it to generate the basic HTML structure for a web page. So I'll copy this prompt and paste it into ChatGPT's message input field, submit it, and ChatGPT returns HTML code that you can copy and paste into your text editor. You include your project's HTML code in a file with the .html extension like index.html. So I'll click copy code to copy all of this HTML code and replace everything that's currently in index.html with this new code. So these are some of the basic HTML tags, which are used to define the structure and elements of a web page. An opening tag like this marks the beginning of an element, and the closing tag marks the end. Now, don't worry about what these meta tags it gave us mean. Right now, they're just there to help with character encoding and how the web page gets displayed. And this body element is where we place the main content of the web page, such as text, images, links, paragraphs, and other elements. In this case, we have an H1 heading and a paragraph. So any content placed inside this body element is what we see in the web browser. Here in the scrim, you can click the Run button to view the web page in the mini browser. So cool, there we see Welcome to my web page and then some content below it. All right, now let's make this HTML and page look good. We'll use this second prompt here to ask ChatGPT to add some basic CSS to this page. So I'll copy this prompt and feed it into ChatGPT. And now I get back the HTML with a style block added that includes the CSS styles for the web page. So I'll copy this new HTML code and replace everything inside index.html with this code. And good. Notice how the CSS sort of transforms our bare bones HTML page into something more visually engaging. And there are a few ways to apply CSS styles to your HTML. You can include the CSS styles directly within your HTML file like this. However, this can make your HTML excessively large and messy, so it's better to include the HTML and CSS in separate files. That's what you'll do in most of your projects. So what I'll do is ask the AI to place the HTML and CSS in separate files using this prompt, which I'll paste into ChatGPT. And there we go. We get the code for index.html and styles.css. So first, I'll once again copy this HTML code and replace everything that's in index.html with this new code. And you include your CSS styles in a file with a .css extension like styles.css. So I'll copy the new code for styles.css, then replace what's currently in styles.css with this new code. And as you can see, the page still looks the same. The difference is that now the HTML and CSS are placed in separate files, and that's being done here via the link tag, which is what connects the HTML file to the CSS file. It's a whole lot easier to manage and organize your HTML and CSS this way. All right, so if you have a look at the CSS, you'll see what are called selectors that target or select specific HTML elements and apply styles to them. For example, this selects the body element. This here selects the H1 element using the H1 tag, and then the P tag or paragraph element is selected here. Okay, so now it's your turn. I want you to play around with the HTML and CSS code here in this scrim. Change the text or add more text in the HTML. For example, welcome to Gil's webpage. Or alter the colors in the CSS. For example, I can make this heading red by simply typing red here as the color value, and we see this main heading change to red. Or try changing any of the other CSS properties to see how they affect the page. And if the cart analogy from earlier didn't really make things stick for you, or you want to make HTML and CSS more relatable to you, think of a scenario or a hobby you enjoy. For instance, if you like to cook, imagine how an analogy relating to cooking would help you understand HTML and CSS better using a prompt like this. I'm interested in learning HTML and CSS with an analogy related to cooking. I'll submit that to ChatGPT, and the output suggests thinking of HTML as the list of ingredients and the step by step instructions in a recipe, and that CSS is like the seasoning and presentation of a dish. And then it expands upon this analogy to paint a more vivid picture. And one of the objectives of this course is for you to be able to ask the AI for explanations on specific parts of the code you don't understand. So, throughout this course, I want you to ask ChatGPT questions or to provide you with more details about any of the code or concepts you're curious about or don't quite understand yet. You'll find that as you progress, you'll start understanding how different HTML tags and CSS styles come together to form a web page and how they fit in with JavaScript, which is another essential building block of web development. And ChatGPT will be there every step of the way, assisting you and guiding you in building your projects. So, congrats, you've just written your first lines of HTML and CSS code. And now I'll leave you with a challenge to have you spend some time tinkering with HTML and CSS. I'll paste the challenge here as a comment in index.html. First, I'd like you to add a second level heading to the page using an H2 element, and then add a paragraph below the new heading. And I'd also like you to increase the text size of both headings. I've also included a stretch goal, which is to display a picture on the page. This could be a photo of you or any image you'd like. You can add an image to the scrim by simply dragging your image right into the Explore sidebar here. And don't hesitate to ask ChatGPT for help or ask it any questions about HTML and CSS. I'll see you in the next scrim where you will build your first project. All right, you've gotten an overview of HTML and CSS. So how can we start using AI tools to simplify the process of building projects with HTML and CSS? Well, you're about to find out. So let's get our feet wet and start by creating one of the most commonly used elements on any website or app, a login button. More specifically, a login with Twitter button, which you've likely seen before. We'll leverage the power of our AI companion, ChatGPT, to guide us through this process. You will work with HTML to structure the button and then CSS to make the button look visually appealing and interactive so that it looks like this. So let's jump right in and ask ChatGPT to help us out. To kick things off, I have provided two files, index.html and styles.css, which you started to learn about in the previous lesson. And in the file prompts.md, I've added the first prompt I'll use to build this login button. So in this prompt, I'm assigning the AI a role. I'm saying you are developer GPT, an assistant that helps write code for people who don't have coding experience. And then I'm describing the task, which is to create the HTML and CSS files for a rounded button resembling the Twitter login button. And I requested making the code easy to understand for non-coders and to avoid using any complex CSS layout features. I also mentioned more specific requirements, like using basic CSS properties to horizontally center the button and to add some space above it for visual separation. And finally, I want ChatGPT to document each CSS property with a short code comment. Overall, this prompt provides clear instructions for the task at hand, which is something you should keep in mind when prompting an AI like ChatGPT. So what I'll do is copy this prompt, then head over to ChatGPT and paste it into the message input field, send it, then kick back and await the requested code. So here's the generated HTML and CSS, and below it, ChatGPT provides an explanation of the code. So feel free to pause for a bit and read through these details if you'd like to know more about the HTML and CSS. In the HTML file, you'll see common HTML elements like a div and a button. And these class attributes, as you'll see, are for the CSS styling. And inside the button, there is some text that says login with Twitter. So I'll copy this HTML code snippet from ChatGPT, then replace all the code in index.html with the new code. Click the run button, and good. Now you should be able to view the button in the mini browser, displaying the text login with Twitter. All right, next I'll copy the CSS snippet from ChatGPT and paste it into styles.css. So this CSS targets or selects the container and rounded button class names defined in our HTML. Then using CSS properties like text align, background color, color, and border, it gives the button a distinctive look, which does in fact resemble the Twitter login button. Awesome. And ChatGPT was even intelligent enough to determine which color to apply to the button to make it match the Twitter brand. And notice that next to each CSS property is a comment generated by ChatGPT to help us better understand what the CSS is doing. And if you pause for a moment and review this code, you might be surprised by how much you might be able to understand. Many CSS properties are intuitively named almost like they're written in plain English. So, take for example, background color. It does precisely what it says, it sets the background color. Similarly, the color property defines the text colors, and other properties such as border, padding, and font size follow a similar pattern. And together, these properties define the look and feel of our button. And if you start to tinker with some of these properties, you'll learn a bit more about what they do and how they affect the appearance of the button. For instance, if you change this first padding value to 0 pixels or 50 pixels, you might realize that this property controls the spacing inside the button, or that the margin top property controls the space outside and above the button, and a property like font size sets the size of the text, and so on. Okay, so we've created our button, but we won't stop here because now I have a challenge for you. I want you to experiment more with the HTML and CSS and transform this button into a login with GitHub button. As a developer, you will likely interact with a button like this quite a bit. You might immediately notice some of the differences between this button and the Twitter login button. For example, the GitHub button has a different background color, the borders are not rounded, and the button text is also different. So I'll add the steps to this challenge here at the top of styles.css. This challenge will require you to modify 2 lines of code in the CSS file and 1 line of code in the HTML file. And I've also included the color code for the background of the GitHub button, which is this value here. So think about the changes you need to make and go for it. And remember, if you get stuck or need guidance, ChatGPT is here to help. I'll meet you back soon to go over the challenge together. All right, hopefully you've updated your button to look like this. Now let's go over the challenge together. First, I need to turn the button into a login with GitHub button, which tells me that I need to update the text between the button tags here in the HTML file. So I'll replace Twitter with GitHub, and there we go. The button now displays login with GitHub. Good. Next, I need to update the CSS to make the button look more like this. And notice how this color code that starts with a hash symbol looks a bit like 2 of the values being used here in the CSS for the rounded button. So I'll copy this color code and let's see what happens if I update the value of the color property to the new color value. Well, it looks like this just updates the text color, but I want the text to remain white, so I'll undo that. And just above, I see that this line here controls the background color. So I'll replace this color value with the new color. And yep, that looks exactly like what I'm going for. Finally, the login with GitHub button has square corners instead of rounded corners. So let's see how to update that in styles.css. Looking at the comments, I see that this border radius property rounds the corners of the button. Now, currently it's set to 20px or pixels, so I'm assuming that setting this to a smaller value will make the corners appear less rounded. So I'll try 10 pixels, and that's looking closer to square corners. So how about bringing the value down to 0 pixels? And yes, that does the trick. All right, so now we have a simple yet functional and styled login button that you can start to use in your projects. Finally, when you hover over a button or click on it, it's common for the button to be interactive and respond in some way. Currently, it's not doing that. So let's ask ChatGPT to suggest CSS to add hover and click effects to update the button's appearance when it's hovered or clicked. For that, I'll use this prompt here. It instructs it to generate the necessary CSS for adding hover and click effects on the button. And I need to let ChatGPT know that the button now has a background color set to this value. And I want to make its background color brighter when hovered over or clicked, and to add a comment next to each CSS property. So I'll copy this prompt, paste it into ChatGPT, and good, I get back the CSS code for the hover and click effects, which you'll notice that they will be implemented using :hover for when the mouse is over the button and :active for when the button is being clicked. So I'll just copy the new CSS toward the bottom, then paste it into styles.css. And let's test it in the mini browser. When I hover over the button, I see that the background color changes to a grayish color, and clicking on it makes it darker. Great! This not only makes the button more engaging, but it also improves the user experience by providing visual feedback. All right, so that about wraps up building our login with Twitter and GitHub buttons. And remember, while ChatGPT does provide an excellent starting point, I do want you to keep tweaking and modifying this code to view how each property or value you change affects the look of the button. And I'm sure that you still might have a lot of questions about what some of this code is doing, and that's perfectly okay. So, what I want you to do is take a moment to ask ChatGPT about any code that appears confusing or that you want to learn more about. For example, what's the purpose of the hash symbol in color values? Or what does :hover and active mean? To help you ask these questions, I'll provide a prompt here that asks ChatGPT, hey, can you explain what the hash symbol and :hover and :active mean in the following CSS code, followed by the CSS code snippet to evaluate. So great job building your very first project with AI. I'll see you in the next scrim where we'll go over some of the basics of prompting. All right, AI coders, let's see some of these prompting techniques in action. Now we're going to design and build an essential part of any website or landing page, the hero section. This is the first thing your visitors might see, so making a good impression is important. With the help of our AI tool, ChatGPT, we'll create a vibrant hero section using HTML and CSS. So let's dive right in. I've already included HTML and CSS files for the project, as well as an image we'll use in our page named chair.png. First, we're going to generate the HTML and CSS of the hero section. So let's turn to ChatGPT for some assistance. In the file prompts.md, I've set up the first prompt to work with. It's an instruction-based prompt with specific steps to help us reach the desired outcome. It clearly explains the desired output, which is the HTML and CSS for a hover chair website's hero section, and then it provides some context about the product. And it describes exactly what it should contain: a main heading, subheading, short description paragraph, and a call to action link styled as a button. It also outlines some guidelines for the code, like making the code easy to understand for non-coders and avoiding the use of complex CSS features. And it even provides some aesthetic guidelines, like to use an elegant and neutral color palette with a focus on earthy tones and subdued hues. And as usual, I want it to document the CSS with code comments. And as a reminder of the overall goal and purpose of the task, it states that the final result should be an engaging and visually appealing hero section that effectively showcases the Hoverchair brand. So I'll just copy and paste this prompt into ChatGPT, and it generates the HTML and CSS code to set up the hero section. So first, I'll copy the HTML code and paste it into index.html. Looking at the HTML structure, I see that it consists of a header element, and nested inside it is a hero heading, subheading, and description, just like we asked for, and an anchor element or link that's going to be styled to look like a button with this class name. And here in the mini browser, we see the hero section taking shape. So next, let's apply some styles to the page using the CSS ChatGPT gave us. I'll click to copy this code, then paste it into styles.css. And wonderful, the hero section is starting to look much better with the CSS applied. So now, how about a challenge? I'll paste the steps for you here in styles.css. So for this challenge, I'd like you to increase the size of the Learn More button text because it's looking a bit too small, and we do want to draw more attention to it so users can click on it and hopefully purchase the amazing hover chair. Then I want you to add a little more color to the page by changing the text color of the subheading, which is this element here, to the color value provided here. So give it a shot, and I'll catch up with you when you're done to go over it together. Okay, hopefully you got that. So first, to increase the size of the button text, I see that the button is this element here with the class name CTA-button. So in the CSS, I'll find that class name, which is this CSS rule here. And you've learned that the font size property